Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to StoriesRoc. And there are always those things that you can always laugh about later, but not exactly when they're happening. So tonight you get to hear all about it. Mistakes were made. True confessions, New Year's resolutions, and lessons learned eventually.
Our next reader is Leah Ruekberg. She has an MA in Teaching Humanities from Colorado College and is a certified English teacher. She is a massage therapist, writer, storyteller, teacher, and founder of StoriesRoc. She has a passion for the spoken word. Squeaky boots. A little known fact, when Leah was 4 years old, she loved to dance with the fairies in her living room and play the windowsill, which was really a piano. She will read Ammunition.
You know how hard it is to follow her. Yes. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Mildred Griffith stood on the front row of her 6th grade class with arms folded, her beady eyes surveying the rows of students who sat silently, backs erect, hands folded on the desk, eyes looking up. A red cashmere sweater draped her shoulder, held in place with a string of pearls. And the stylish bouffant hairdo, which had looked fresh on Sunday, appeared to have suffered from the bondage of a toilet paper wrapping and a good night's rest, so that it now resembled something more like a dented black helmet. Her Jackie Kennedy hairdo was restored at Alma's Beauty Shop each Saturday, and we watched its demise throughout the week as Mrs. Griffith reinforced it with layers of hairspray and used pencils to scratch inside the nest. Estee Lauder Youth Dew perfume permeated the room. At home, my father had said that when Mildred came to church, no one else needed to wear perfume because she wore enough for the whole congregation. As her minister, he would never say that to her face, but as her student, I received the full bouquet every weekday. We didn't have to guess when she was nearby, we could smell her coming. Mrs. Griffith's eyes, which were outlined in black, looked especially menacing now as she scrutinized each face. Her pencil-thin lips, though rouged with lipstick, were invisible. The sound of her high-heeled shoes clicking on linoleum traveled up and down each row. Uh-oh, I thought, somebody's in trouble. Eyes moved side to side with heads bowed, searching for clues. Mrs. Griffith had been a traveling song evangelist before she married Jack and settled down in Meade, Kansas to teach school, direct the choir, and sing at my church. In the Nazarene church where my daddy preached, it was the evangelist's job to convict people of sin so that they would come to the altar and confess. Nazarenes believed that we were called into holiness, but we could backslide. So that's why twice a year we had revival meetings. We went to church every night for 2 weeks where we heard sermons about the wages of sin, followed by long altar calls where Mrs. Griffith led us in singing verse after verse of Are You Ready for the Judgment Day? Some of you are looking puzzled. This is not your experience? Teenagers usually sat on the back row. So my dad would walk the aisles and stop and ask people if they were right with the Lord. And wouldn't you like to come to the altar and settle the question? If they held out, Dad stopped the singing and tried another tack. He often told some variation of a story about someone who had been in a service very much like this, who had been under conviction while Jesus was calling, but had hardened his heart and had left the service and been tragically killed on the way home. He asked again, if you died tonight, do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you would go to heaven? And then he would turn to Mrs. Griffith and ask her to sing another verse of Are You Ready? My dad and Mrs. Griffith were a team. Two skilled evangelists who wouldn't give up until every backslider had been convicted of her sins and come to the altar, until everyone could stand and testify that she was saved, sanctified, and on her way to heaven. In the classroom, I looked around at my classmates surreptitiously. I wonder who it is. Carol Novinger? Mike Strauss? Janice Vanderpool? No, they never get into trouble. Sally Shelton? Well, Sally had the biggest breasts in 6th grade, but she didn't get in trouble. Jim Homer? Rodney Evans? Well, maybe. Jim Borth? Well, he draws sailboats during class, but only after he's finished his work. I wonder who it is. Somebody's going to get killed. Mrs. Griffith never sent students to Harold Thuma, the principal. She practiced swift and sure punishment, slapping faces, paddling bottoms, thumping heads with her knuckles. No one messed with Mrs. Griffith. Up and down the rows she marched as we wilted in our chairs. I couldn't believe she didn't just name the guilty one and make him grab his ankles. The clicking of her shoes stopped in the back of the room. Friday after school, she announced, someone took the gospel records I gave to each of you and destroyed them on the playground. My head popped up. Did she mean me? My heart was pounding into my ears. I looked around. Gary Goodnight, Rodney Evans, Barbara Edwards, they also raised their heads. Wait, this was a dirty trick. This was just like when the lifeguard blows her whistle at the pool, the guilty ones always look up. So you know who you are, Mrs. Griffith gloated. She rushed to the front of the room smiling. Oh no, she's going to kill me. Then she'll tell my father and he'll kill me all over again. I won't be able to sit down for a week. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I gave sacred gospel music to you so that you could share these recordings with your families, not so that you could destroy them. Leah, Gary, Rodney, Barbara, march yourselves out to the playground and clean up every last piece. We guilty rose up and slinked out the door. I had forgotten all about the gospel records. Mrs. Griffith had come to school the previous Friday with boxes of 78 RPM discs. So you know what they were. Old technology. No jacket covers. She offered them to us at the end of the school day. She gave me recordings of Tennessee Ernie Ford, Mahalia Jackson, the Blackwood Brothers Gospel Quartet. We had those at home too. But she also gave me records of singers I'd never heard of, like the Caravans and Clara Ward and the Dixie Hummingbirds. Because my daddy was a preacher, I think she had given me a few extras. But everyone had received some. We stacked the recordings on top of our books and headed out the door for the weekend. And Gary, Rodney, Barbara, Kayleen, and I went out the back door and across the playground. Well, Gary grinned, revealing a chipped tooth in the front, and long black hair fell across his forehead and over his eyebrows, something Mrs. Griffith detested. And because she couldn't shame him into getting a haircut, she made him wear barrettes during class. Gary's blue eyes twinkled as he held one of the records in his right hand, took aim at Rodney, and sliced the air with it like a frisbee. Rodney jumped back. It smacked the metal jungle gym, making the sound of a baseball connecting with a metal bat. Crack! Oh, it was a delicious sound. The record shattered into pieces. So I took one and aimed at Kayleen. And I tried to throw it sideways like Gary had done, but mine hit the side of the brick school building and made a little modest thud and then fell to the ground. So I tried again. Kayleen threw one at Barbara. She jumped out of the way. I mean, she could dodge a bullet. She picked it up and fired back. And that fall afternoon, we gave no thought to the contents of the recordings. They were ammunition for a record war. The thick black discs sailed through the air amidst peals of laughter. And when they were all broken, we just skipped on home. On this Monday morning, we were not so carefree. Good citizens all caught in a misdemeanor, the guilt weighed on our souls. I mean, this wasn't murder or grand larceny. It wasn't like we'd giggled in church or accepted communion with unconfessed sins. But silently, we four guilty ones picked up every chip of black plastic we could find and returned to class. Nothing more was said at school. And as I said, Mrs. Griffith and my daddy worked together. They talked to each other. It was double jeopardy. If I got in trouble at school, I was in trouble at home. But nothing was said at home. So after a while, I forgot about it. At the end of the first quarter, 1964, Mrs. Griffith handed our grade cards to us and told us to return them with our parents' signatures. The report cards at Meade Grade School scored our progress in reading, spelling, writing, language, numbers, geography, hygiene, music, physical education, and science. Now, in elementary school, we had received grade cards with just a little S and maybe a plus or minus next to it, but in 6th grade, we received letter grades, A, B, C, D, and F. And we were also given grades for citizenship, carefulness, cooperation, courtesy, dependability, obedience, health, industry, initiative, and thrift. How would she even know those things? These were marked with an X for trait well developed, Y for improvement being shown, and Z, greater improvement desirable. And the final grade was conduct. Now, in previous years, I never saw anything but a string of S's in my grade card. So by this time, I took the gray little envelope. I didn't even look at it. I tossed it on the table and went outside to play. After supper, Dad pulled my grade card out of the sleeve and opened it up. What in the world? He looked up at me. What are you doing in Mildred's class to earn a D- in conduct? I felt my face turning red. I hadn't seen this coming. I couldn't imagine. A D- in conduct? I shook my head. I don't know. I didn't do anything. I racked my brain to try to remember anything I might have done. He said, Leah, you don't make a D- in conduct for not doing anything. What did you do? Suddenly it hit me. The gospel records. Mrs. Griffith hadn't called home or sent me to the principal's office. Instead, she had waited for report cards so she could use her ammunition. I felt hot with rage. What a dirty sneak! From now on, I would do nothing in her class. I told my father about the gospel record war on the playground. I said we were having fun. Besides, she didn't even want those records anymore. I can't believe she gave me a D- in conduct. Dad took his fountain pen out of his pocket, signed the back of my report card, and handed it back to me. When I was in school, I'm afraid I did things to aggravate my teacher that were a lot worse than breaking records on the playground. He shook his head and laughed. My brothers, Dallas and Homer, they competed with each other to see who could be the first to make the teacher cry. Well, what did you do? I asked, hoping to change the subject. He smiled, shook his head. Then he looked me in the eye. I want you to write a letter of apology to Mrs. Griffith and return it with your report card. But this isn't fair. I crossed my arms and turned away. My dad placed his hand on my arm. You're not going to win a fight with Mrs. Griffith. So the next morning I wrote a tepid, obligatory letter apologizing for leaving a mess on the playground and placed it on her desk. Well, at the end of the year, when the gray envelope came home, I opened it first. In academic subjects, I had earned A's and B's, but my citizenship grades weren't so stellar. My final grade for conduct was risen to a C, but for industry, sustained effort, she had written the letter Z, bottom of the alphabet, greater improvement desired. Well, I still had ammunition of my own. I folded the grade card, put it back in the sleeve, and this report card my dad never saw, never signed. Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. And we hope to see you next month or the month after that. Please send us your stories. Thank you again. See you next time.